Picture this. You're 22 years old, surrounded by friends who would die for you, and you've just made what seems like the smartest decision of your life. You're protecting the people you love most by staying one step ahead of the most dangerous dark wizard in history. But that single choice, that one moment of clever strategy, will destroy everything you've ever cared about and land you in a prison so horrific that most inmates literally die from despair. This is the story of Sirius Black, a man whose greatest act of loyalty became his ultimate betrayal, whose closest friendships harbored the seeds of his destruction, and whose journey from beloved godfather to wrongfully imprisoned fugitive reveals the most heartbreaking truth about the wizarding world. Sometimes being innocent isn't enough to save you. You think you know Sirius Black, the reckless rebel, the escaped prisoner, the tragic godfather who died too soon. But the real story goes deeper than any textbook dares to tell you. This is about a man who sacrificed everything for friendship, only to discover that friendship itself could be weaponized against him. And if you're ready to discover the devastating truth behind one of the wizarding world's greatest injustices, stay with me, because we're about to uncover the hidden tragedy that turned a hero into a prisoner, and a prisoner into legend. Before we dive into this forgotten tale of loyalty and betrayal, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because we're just getting started with the untold stories that shaped the wizarding world. Now let's begin with the boy who would become both savior and scapegoat. The rebellion started before he could even walk. Born on November 3rd, 1959, into the ancient House of Black, Sirius Black III entered a world where his destiny had already been carved in stone. His parents, Orion and Walburga Black, weren't just pure-blood supremacists. They were fanatics who believed that magical blood ran in hierarchies, and theirs was the purest of all. Picture growing up in a household where your family tree is literally burned into the wall, where portraits of your ancestors scream about blood purity from their frames, and where loving the wrong person could get you blasted off the family tapestry entirely. But here's what makes Sirius's story so compelling. He was born wrong for his family from the very beginning. While his younger brother Regulus absorbed their parents' poison like gospel, Sirius rejected everything the House of Black represented. He didn't just disagree with his family's beliefs, he was physically incapable of accepting them. Something in his core rebelled against the hatred, the superiority, the darkness that his bloodline had cultivated for generations. When the Hogwarts letter arrived, Walburga Black probably expected her eldest son to follow family tradition straight into Slytherin House. Instead, the Sorting Hat placed him in Gryffindor, effectively making him the black sheep of a family that had produced dark wizards for centuries. That single moment of sorting didn't just determine which dormitory he'd sleep in. It declared war between Sirius and everything his family stood for. At Hogwarts, Sirius found something his pure-blood heritage could never provide: genuine friendship. James Potter, a messy-haired boy with an infectious laugh and an overdeveloped sense of justice, became more than just his roommate. James became his brother in every way that mattered. Then came Remus Lupin, the quiet bookworm hiding a devastating secret, and Peter Pettigrew, the eager follower desperate to belong to something greater than himself. These four boys called themselves the Marauders, and together they rewrote the rules of friendship at Hogwarts. They weren't just school friends who hung out between classes. They were co-conspirators in a brotherhood that pushed the boundaries of magic itself. The Marauders map, that legendary piece of parchment that revealed every secret passage and every person in Hogwarts, wasn't just a prank tool. It was a testament to their combined genius and their absolute trust in each other. But their greatest act of loyalty came when they discovered Remus Lupin's secret. Most wizarding families would have abandoned a friend who transformed into a werewolf every full moon. The Blacks certainly would have. Instead, Sirius, James, and Peter spent years secretly learning to become animagi, one of the most dangerous and complex magical transformations possible, just so they could safely accompany their friend during his most vulnerable moments. Think about that for a moment. These weren't adults making calculated decisions about risk and reward. These were teenagers willing to risk expulsion, imprisonment, or death just to ensure their friend wouldn't suffer alone. Sirius's animagus form was a massive black dog, powerful enough to keep a werewolf in line, but gentle enough to provide comfort during Remus's darkest hours. They called him Padfoot, and in that form, he found a freedom that his human life in the House of Black had never allowed. The friendship that blossomed between these four boys was more than brotherhood. It was a chosen family that replaced the toxic bonds of blood with something infinitely stronger: unconditional love and mutual sacrifice. For Sirius, who had spent his entire childhood being told he was wrong, broken, a disappointment to his noble lineage, the Marauders represented everything good about magic and friendship. But even in paradise, there were warning signs. Harry Potter would later witness through Severus Snape's memories how the group dynamics actually worked, and what he saw was troubling. James Potter, for all his eventual heroism, had a cruel streak when it came to students he considered beneath him. And Peter Pettigrew watched these displays of power with what Harry described as hungry eyes, absorbing not the loyalty and courage that defined the group, but the intoxicating rush of belonging to something powerful. Peter was always the weakest of the four, the one who struggled most with magic, who laughed loudest at their jokes, who seemed most grateful just to be included. But that desperate need to belong, that overwhelming desire to be close to power and strength, was already shaping him into something dangerous. While Sirius saw Peter as a friend to be protected, Peter saw Sirius as a source of reflected glory, a connection to greatness that he could never achieve on his own. The Hogwarts years were golden, but they were also preparation for a war that was already brewing beyond the castle walls. Voldemort was rising, gathering followers, building an army of dark wizards who shared the same pure-blood fanaticism that Sirius had rejected in his own family. The irony was perfect. The boy, who had been disowned for refusing to embrace blood purity, would spend his adult life fighting against everything his family believed in. When they left Hogwarts, the four friends immediately joined the Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore's secret organization dedicated to fighting Voldemort and his Death Eaters. But war has a way of testing friendships that school pranks never could. The pressure, the constant danger, the knowledge that any mission could be their last began to strain even the strongest bonds. Sirius began to suspect that there was a spy within the Order, someone feeding information to Voldemort about their plans and operations. His suspicions fell on Remus Lupin, the friend he had risked everything to help during their school years. The logic seemed sound. Werewolves were outcasts in wizarding society, despised and feared by most magical people. Voldemort had been recruiting such outcasts, promising them acceptance and power in his new world order. It was a reasonable suspicion, but it was also wrong, and that mistaken judgment would set up the most devastating betrayal in wizarding history. The real spy was Peter Pettigrew, the friend they had all underestimated. The weakest marauder who had been slowly corrupted by his proximity to power and his terror of being on the losing side. Peter had been feeding information to Voldemort for months, watching his friends plan missions and make sacrifices, while secretly ensuring their enemies stayed one step ahead. But the worst was yet to come. James Potter and Lily Evans had married and had a son, Harry, who became the target of a prophecy that marked him as Voldemort's greatest threat. When Dumbledore advised the young family to go into hiding using the Fidelius charm, they faced the most important decision of their lives. Who could they trust with their lives and the life of their infant son? The answer seemed obvious. Sirius Black, the friend who had become a brother, the man who had chosen loyalty over blood, who had sacrificed his inheritance and his family for the cause of justice. James and Lily wanted Sirius as their secret keeper, the one person in the world who would hold the magical secret of their location. But Sirius made a decision that seemed brilliant at the time and would haunt him for the rest of his life. He said no, not because he didn't want to protect them, not because he feared the responsibility, but because he was too obvious a choice. Sirius knew that Voldemort would immediately suspect him of being the Potter's secret keeper. He would be the first person tortured for information, the first target of the Death Eater's most brutal interrogation methods. If he broke under torture, James, Lily, and baby Harry would die. So Sirius proposed what seemed like genius. Make Peter Pettigrew the secret keeper instead. Who would suspect Peter? He was weak, unremarkable, the least likely of their group to be trusted with such a monumental responsibility. It was the perfect double bluff, a strategy so clever that even Voldemort's paranoid mind wouldn't see it coming. The plan was flawless, except for one devastating detail. Peter Pettigrew was already working for the other side. For months, Peter had been living a double life that would have impressed the most skilled actor. During order meetings, he listened to their plans with the same concerned expression as everyone else. When friends were killed or captured, he mourned alongside his brothers in arms. When they discussed strategy for protecting the Potters, he offered suggestions with apparent sincerity, all while secretly reporting every detail back to the Dark Lord who was hunting them. The psychological torment Peter must have endured during this period is almost unimaginable. He was watching his closest friends plan their own destruction while pretending to help them survive. Every laugh they shared was built on lies. Every moment of trust was a betrayal waiting to happen. But Peter had made his choice, driven by the same desperate need for acceptance that had defined his entire life. He had found a new source of power to attach himself to, and this time, he believed he had chosen the winning side. When Sirius suggested Peter as the secret keeper, it must have felt like divine intervention to the traitor. Not only would he have direct access to the Potter's location, but he would be trusted with their lives by the very people he was betraying. The irony was so perfect, it almost seemed scripted by fate itself. On Halloween night 1981, Peter Pettigrew gave Voldemort the location of the Potter family. What happened next changed the wizarding world forever. Voldemort murdered James and Lily Potter in their own home, but when he tried to kill baby Harry, something unprecedented occurred. The killing curse rebounded, destroying Voldemort's body and leaving Harry with nothing but a lightning bolt scar. Sirius arrived at the ruined house in Godric's Hollow to find his best friends dead and their baby son crying among the rubble. The scene that greeted him was beyond his worst nightmares. James sprawled in the hallway, killed trying to buy his family time to escape, and Lily dead in the nursery, her body draped protectively over Harry's crib. The two people he loved most in the world had died because of a decision he had made, a recommendation he had given, a trust he had placed in the wrong person. But there was no time for grief. Baby Harry needed to be taken to safety, and Sirius knew that Hagrid would be coming soon to collect him on Dumbledore's orders. In a moment of crushing generosity that revealed the true nobility of his character, Sirius gave Hagrid his flying motorcycle, the prized possession that represented his freedom and rebellion, so that Harry could be transported safely to his relatives. Then Sirius set out to find Peter Pettigrew, driven by a rage so pure it was almost supernatural. He had trusted Peter with everything, and Peter had destroyed everything Sirius cared about. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, about making sure the real traitor paid for what he had done. But Peter had always been cleverer than anyone gave him credit for, and he had been preparing for this confrontation since the moment he chose to betray his friends. When Sirius finally tracked him down on a crowded London street, Peter was ready with a performance that would seal both their fates. In front of dozens of Muggle witnesses, Peter shouted loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sirius! How could you? How could you betray James and Lily?" The accusation hung in the air for just a moment, long enough for the witnesses to register what they had heard. Then Peter detonated a massive explosion behind himself, killing 12 innocent muggles and blowing up the entire street. In the chaos and smoke that followed, Peter cut off one of his own fingers, left it behind as evidence of his death, and transformed into his rat animagus form. While emergency responders rushed to help the victims and search for survivors, a small brown rat scurried away through the rubble and disappeared into the London sewer system. When the smoke cleared, Sirius Black was found standing in the middle of the devastation, surrounded by bodies and debris, laughing hysterically. To everyone who saw him, the evidence seemed overwhelming. Here was the man who had betrayed the Potters, murdered their secret keeper to cover his tracks, and killed a dozen innocent bystanders in the process. The laughter was the final damning detail that convinced everyone of his guilt. But that laughter wasn't the sound of a man celebrating murder. It was the sound of someone's sanity snapping under the weight of perfect, terrible irony. In a single moment, Sirius understood exactly what had happened. He had recommended the traitor who killed his best friends, and now that same traitor had framed him for the crime. The psychological impact was so devastating that his mind simply broke, producing a reaction that looked like guilt but was actually the complete opposite. Within hours, Sirius Black was arrested and transported to Azkaban prison without trial, without investigation, without anyone bothering to verify the evidence against him. The case seemed so clear-cut that the Ministry of Magic saw no point in wasting time on legal proceedings. After all, who would believe that Peter Pettigrew, the weakest of the marauders, could have orchestrated such an elaborate deception? And so began the most unjust imprisonment in wizarding history. Sirius Black, innocent of every crime he was accused of, was locked away in a fortress designed to break the spirits of the guilty. He would spend the next 12 years surrounded by Dementors, creatures that feed on hope and happiness, in a place where most prisoners died from despair long before their sentences were complete. The real Peter Pettigrew, meanwhile, had found the perfect hiding place, the Weasley family's pet rat, Scabbers. For over a decade, he lived as a beloved family pet, sleeping in Ron Weasley's bed, eating scraps from the dinner table, and watching the wizarding world celebrate the defeat of Voldemort, while the man who had made it possible rotted in prison for crimes Peter himself had committed. The injustice was so complete, so perfectly orchestrated, that it seemed almost supernatural. Sirius had lost everything: his friends, his freedom, his sanity, his reputation, while his betrayer lived comfortably as a pampered pet. But in Azkaban, surrounded by darkness and despair, Sirius held on to one thought that the Dementors couldn't take from him: the knowledge that he was innocent. That knowledge became his anchor in hell. Prison number PZ390 sat in his cell, watching fellow inmates succumb to madness one by one, while he clung to a truth so simple it seemed almost ridiculous. He didn't do it. The Dementors could drain every happy memory from his mind, could force him to relive the worst moments of his life on endless repeat. But they couldn't take away a fact. And facts, it turned out, were harder to destroy than hope. Most Azkaban prisoners lasted maybe 5 years before the despair killed them. Sirius lasted 12, not through strength or courage, but through the stubborn power of truth itself. Every day brought fresh psychological torture as the Dementors forced him to experience his friends' deaths over and over again. Every night he heard James calling his name, saw Lily's lifeless eyes, felt baby Harry's tears on his hands as he handed him to Hagrid. The guilt wasn't about the murders he didn't commit. It was about the recommendation he did make, the trust he had placed in a friend who was already lost to darkness. But something else kept him functional during those endless years of torment: his animagus form. The Dementors fed on human emotions, human memories, human despair. When Sirius transformed into Padfoot, His mind became simpler, more focused, less susceptible to their influence. A dog's thoughts were immediate and practical. Hunger, cold, the need to survive another day. In his darkest moments, when the weight of his losses threatened to crush what remained of his sanity, Sirius would transform and find temporary peace in the uncomplicated mind of an animal. Sirius Black's story reveals the cruelest truth about justice. Sometimes being innocent isn't enough. His greatest act of loyalty became his ultimate betrayal. His deepest friendship harbored his destruction, and his noble heart led him straight into hell. The boy who rejected his family's darkness for something better paid the ultimate price for trusting the wrong person. In the end, Sirius proved that love and loyalty can be the most dangerous weapons of all.